Hey there, world, and my poker coaching. I am your coach, Tristan Wade, and today I am going to talk about 3 tips to run deep in small stakes tournaments. So let's get right to it. All right. So, do you struggle in small stakes MTTs? What do you think are your biggest issues? I want you to think about that for a second. What do you think are your biggest issues in small stakes MTTs? Well, from my students, what I usually hear is they don't know how to adjust to their opponents. Their opponents call all the raises and never fold. They get unlucky along the way. And that's a big issue in MTTs because luck plays a big factor. But just think about that for a second, okay? And what is the dynamic of the players you see in your tournaments? I'm sure it's something of what I just explained. You have people that just limp a lot, people that go to the flop with any 2 cards, people that don't fold any raises. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. How can you adjust or exploit these opponents? That's what you need to think about. Okay? How can you adjust your strategy or adjust the other way to exploit these opponents? Okay? I want you to just think about this because poker is such a fascinating game. No Limit Hold'em is so pure in the sense of how the game operates. And then dealing with people, that's always interesting. So understanding who you're playing against really is kind of the basis of how you can adjust your strategies from this baseline that we try to teach as poker players and poker coaches. Okay, but either way, neither here nor there. I just wanted you to think about these things. I'm going to give you 3 tips that will help make your life easier when playing smaller stakes tournaments. Let's get right into it. Tip number 1. It's kind of simple, but it matters. Play solid ranges. Okay? It is very basic advice, but this is the most important. Range is your base for all future decisions. So if you're already playing outside of your range, when you enter the pot, you might just be playing too many hands, and then I can't give you good advice because fold pre, right? I'm sure anyone who's talked poker with their friends and you get the response fold pre, you're just like, come on, where's the real advice? But that is real advice. Like if you're playing way outside of your range, you're probably going to get punished. Okay. Know how to expand your range as your position changes. Playing an early position, you obviously need a tighter range because you have more opponents. As less people are in the pot and you get a positional advantage, you get to expand upon that range. Okay, this is very, very important. Don't get impatient. Stay within your range. There's a reason why we construct these charts to have cutoffs where you should or shouldn't play. Now, you can obviously, venture outside of range at certain times for certain reasons, but you mostly want to stay within your range. That's why there's a cutoff to some of these things. So let's look at some charts and I'll give some insights. Okay, first chart we're looking at here is under the gun 8, 100 big blind raise first in range. That's what RFI means. Now, notice there are some hands that make the cut, like ace 3 suited, like some of these king 8 suited, king 6 suited, ace jack off, king queen off, and some of these suited connectors. So you can play those hands at some capacity. You can play those hands way more frequently if you have weak opponents who aren't going to 3-bet you and just want to see flops because those hand classes usually play well multi-way. But if you're trying to stay within your range, maybe if it has a shred of playability and there's tough players around you or players that never fold, maybe you just want to tighten your range and never play the queen 9 suited, never play the 10-8 suited, never play the 8-9 suited, never play the king jack off, the ace jack off, the king queen off, right? So that's the first tip I have is sure, you might be able to expand upon your range sometimes, but I would say play solid, play more solid than try to expand out and play looser first. So if you're playing against players that don't fold, players that are just going to call anything, play solid. That way you win the battle of better starting hands to start, and then you can open your range in different scenarios when it's so called for. Okay, let's look at 50 big blind under the gun, 8 raise first in range. You can see it here. We got suited aces. We got king 8 suited plus. We got jack 9 suited plus, 5s plus. right? That's a strong 50 big blind range. Stay within that range. Now notice how we expand out here on the hijack. We get to play now almost any pair. We get to play those 4 or 5 suiteds to the 6, 7 suiteds and stuff like that. We get to open maybe 10, 7 suited, 9, 7 suited, queen 7 suited, king 3 suited. So we play a much conservative, tighter range at 50 big blinds, and then that gets to expand from the hijack quite liberally. So just understand, as players drop, as there's fewer players to play against, as fewer players have position, like in this hijack example, you're only against the cutoff or the button, that's where we get to play a wider range, but we still stay solid. Like, these aren't very vulnerable, weak holdings, right? King 3 suited, king 4 suited, those are pretty good hands. You have a high card, you're suited. Ace 8 offsuit, ace 9 offsuit, that's also what we see there. The offsuit broadways, these can all make the nuts in many different ways. So just understand how your ranges are and how your ranges extrapolate out when you get a better advantage. Okay, tip 2, play more hands in position. Kind of an easy tip, but this is a good one overall, because it allows you to play a little more poker and take that pre-flop advantage post-flop against weak players. So position is one of the most important factors in No Limit Hold'em. Of course it is, right? We get to see what everyone does, and then we get to act. So that's a big key. Know what hands are worth taking to the flop by calling a raise or 3-betting, right? That's very important too. You should know where your range is going to cut off pre-flop in those spots. It is much easier to play more hands when you are deeper stacked or on/close to the button. That is probably the biggest point to make here, is you get to play more hands when you have a lot of chips, or the players around you have chips, and when you're in position. So the closer you are to the button, the more hands you will get to call or play in position. And then be cautious of playing too many hands from the big blind. Like, don't get me wrong, you are usually getting the best price from the big blind, but you also are out of position and you're up against tighter ranges, and you need to be just a little cautious in that example there. Okay. So let's look. Playing more hands in position here, what is that going to look like? And that's going to look like, just looking at this, that's going to look like 50 big blind button range versus an under the gun 8 open. And now notice what those hands look like. We see not as much 3-betting here, 50 big blinds deep. Our value is basically queens plus. So queens, kings, aces, ace, king, of course. And then we use ace, queen, and ace, jack, and king, queen, and king, jack, and ace 10 as kind of like value / bluff blockers. We can get called by worse stuff, but these hands can start bluffing, and they don't play as great multi-way. But either way, you can call or fold or raise some of those hands. And then notice what we call a lot more in position with here on the button. Suited hands that are connected, small pairs, suited ace X, even suited king X. So just understand the scope of how this operates in the hand classes that want to play in position, because I think that's a really cool chart there. All right. Tip number 3, adjust your strategies at different stages. This is probably one of the most important tips I can give when it comes to playing MTTs, because the way the MTTs work out is when you start, everyone has a ton of chips. When you get closer to the money, your chips are now worth money, so you need to play a lot tighter. When you are in the money, now you need to start trying to play for the win and building up a chip stack so you have a best chance to win when you get to the final table. So very important to understand the different stages of a tournament. Okay, so obviously play more hands early in the tournament when you're deeper stacked. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but that's where you can look at like chip EV, and it's just like, okay, what are my strategies here? Where can I kind of expand on my ranges? And then tighten up your ranges as you get closer to the money. Maybe you don't want to call and play post-flop that much anymore because people are shorter stacked and they're 3-betting, or they're moving all in, or you just don't have enough chips to play flops, turns, and rivers. Also, tighten up your big blind defense as you get closer to the money, because Your chips are worth more. You're trying to survive to make the money. Realize how the tournament dynamics change as you approach the bubble and the money, kind of like what I just stated. And then final table play makes things change dramatically. That's so crucial. When you get to the final table, that's when your chips are worth the most amount of money and your decisions have inflection points that are worth the most dollars, real-time dollars. So raising ranges should change dramatically. Calling ranges, they're so different. They're so different from what chip EV looks like. Even 3-betting ranges, you probably just fold a lot more and you play way more passive basically when it comes to ICM, which is a final table. It's called independent chip model. It's a final table model of how you should play since you're playing for so much money at a final table. But it just changes so dramatically, and you definitely need to think about how that works. Okay, let me give one example here. So this is a 40 big blind, big blind chip EV range versus an under the gun 8 open. So under the gun 8 opens a small raise like 2.2x. And this is what we would normally defend in the big blind with chip EV. Now notice this is quite wide of a range. We're calling almost any suited hand. We're calling a lot of offsuit stuff from ace 4 off or better, king 8 off, queen 9 off, jack 9 off, some 8 6 off, 9 7 off, 10 8 off, right? If we were to think about how this changes when we get closer to the money, let's say we're a 1,000 player field, so 15% going to make the money, 150 people make the money, we're down to 200 players. How would you imagine that this range changes, right? You have 40 big blinds, you need a quarter of the field to get eliminated, and you're in the money. What do you think would change in your range here? Think about it. We probably aren't going to play a lot of those ace X offsuits anymore. Maybe we shed the ace 4, ace 5, the ace 7. Maybe we're just ace 8 or better. We definitely are getting rid of king 8 and king 9 because those can't really make the nuts. And then some of these really poor operating suited hands like 9 deuce suited are probably just hitting the muck. We probably want to have a high card like a queen X suited or a king X suited, definitely, because the under the gun range might change as well. But basically, we want to play a lot fewer hands since we're closing in on the money. So this range would get cut drastically, probably by 20 to 40%, I would say. Now, don't get me wrong, you still have playability at 40 big blinds, so you can still have maybe some jack X suited in there. You definitely aren't folding like suited connectors, but your offsuit stuff is going to be cut dramatically and some of your weaker holdings. So that's just something to think about. Okay. And just the 3 tips, the final thoughts I got for the class here is practice patience and operate within your ranges. That's really key. I can't tell you how many students I teach that just don't want to think about range, don't want to operate within that spectrum. There's a reason why we have cutoffs. There's a reason why you don't want to play too many hands. So it's pretty important to be patient and operate within those ranges. Second easy tip is play more hands when the situation calls for it. When you're in position, when you're deep stacked, or when you're not close to the money. When you're incentivized to try to win chips, that's when you want to play more hands. Adjust your strategies for your opponent or the stage of the tournament. Pretty easy, but it's a very important tip, right? If you're playing against loose players or very good players that are going to play in position, maybe you don't want to battle against those players that much. And then where you are in the tournament matters. And then the last point, this really matters. Like, have fun, try hard, try your best, constantly study, and then don't let failure get to you. Tournaments are so tough. There's so much variance. You need to be able to win coin flips. You need to cooler people. You need to run good. So just make sure you have fun with it. You don't stress too hard. You constantly have this Kaizen mindset where you want to improve, where you want to get better. And then don't let failure get to you because you are going to fail. I'm sorry. It's just how tournament poker is. I've played for so long and I have so much failure, but I get up, I dust myself off, and I try again the next day. So do your best, have fun, always try to get better, and then embrace the failure, embrace the process, and eventually you will reach that success you're looking for. So on behalf of My Poker Coaching, I am your coach, Tristan Wade, and I appreciate you for taking some time to go through some 3 tips that will help you run deep in small stakes MTTs. See ya.